Chris, welcome. And you need to unmute yourself, and we need Sire Mathews and Dr. Mohamed El-Guindy. There we go.
Hello.
I know it's late at night for you, but I really appreciate the fact that
I've got the LEDs on. I bought it's a special occasion, so I bought this, and I'm sure some people watching remember these. You know, I thought
I see a couple not long ago. I don't know how I found them, but they were now. What the best way to start this session, because we don't want to hold it up because there are other things we'll start to back up, is that there are a couple of videos, one that Chris Henderson has done and one you've done. By the way, for folks who are watching, these two gentlemen and the one who we are waiting on have a phenomenal background in this area. Chris Henderson used to manage this practice at E&Y for ERS, and so at Grant Thornton, at Rogers Communication, at BlackBerry. You have done all sorts of work for the government in EU and continue to help big organizations. So that's fantastic. So Sire, we won't take up time on that. But I think the best way to go would be to play your videos, right, that we have recorded, because that will really tell people everything, what the challenges are, right? So let me go there. Right?
Yes, thank you for joining.
Here we go, folks. Let me now share the screen and play this video. And you want to hear this because it sets the stage for what we're going to talk about very well.
You can't avoid just taking a very pragmatic approach. And I like to use this Rubik's Cube to sort of give an example. Full disclosure, I'm not going to solve it here, so I hope I don't disappoint anyone with that. But let's assume for a second that this point in the middle is something that you want to protect, right? It's your key asset. It could be anything. And so this is your sort of network perimeter, right? And so what people typically do is they might do an asset list or essentially a snapshot in time. And so they think they understand how it looks. And so you say, okay, the white hosts, they're really secure. The red ones have known vulnerabilities. They might sit on their own VLAN or behind a firewall. These yellow ones, we're not sure. The blue ones are monitored by a 24/7 SOC and so on and so forth. So great, you think you understand it. Well, the issue is that, your asset here in the middle, and then by the time you wake up tomorrow morning, there's a CVE release, right? And it's a 0 day. And by the time you get in and have your coffee in the morning, there's been a change request executed. In fact, there's been 2 change requests executed. Now there's a couple of new ports open on your firewall. And while all this is happening, someone sent an email to your support team and socially engineered them. They've got access to the network. And while all that's happening, someone's sitting outside and they're monitoring the radio spectrum of your communique. And so what you see, I hope quite literally, is that at any time, your security or the kind of overall snapshot of your organization changes. And so this is why I have a sort of real issue with people I don't have a real issue with people that buy the lies, but I have a real issue with people who peddle the lies, mainly vendors who say, buy our product and it will prevent 0 days, it will stop this and it will stop that. I'm not, there's a use for these things for sure, but it's just so much wider than they like
to tell you. It's so much wider than they like to tell you.
Yeah,
I thought I'd finish that off there, right? But yeah.
Yeah, that was actually a very interesting video that you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. No, it was exactly what was needed. I will now move to play Chris's recording, and then we go to the other real stuff. So here we go. 1 second here.
Observations about recent hacks and compromises indicate 2 things that are not new, but need to be confronted. The first is that these unfortunate events will continue to happen, and they have real consequences for all organisations. The second is that country, and in Canada provincial, political will and regulations around cybersecurity risk management need to be stronger. Stats Canada says that 1/5 of Canadian businesses were affected by cybersecurity incidents in 2019, which is the most recently available data. Almost half of those attacks were linked to large businesses. 29% at medium-sized companies and 18% at small businesses. It can happen to you. To think otherwise is naive and even irresponsible. Here's another example of real impact. On the 5th of January, there was a posting that said, TransLink ransomware update. Most systems still down. The Vancouver, BC Transportation Agency TransLink said that as of January the 4th, most of its IT systems are still unavailable, a month after they suffered a ransomware attack. Employees have been receiving pay advances rather than their regular checks. TransLink acknowledged that the ransomware operators also compromised employee data. So how to fix this? Some of this is conceptually and practically simple, and some is hard. First, at the micro level or organisational level, each organisation, including small and medium businesses, should have a reasonable information security management system or program in place. Conceptually, this is simple, but it requires owners and key decision makers to lean in and get educated and then ask the uncomfortable questions. They need to, even if only grudgingly, accept that bad things could happen to them and realise that a minimum level of cybersecurity hygiene is necessary. And further measures may be warranted based on how valuable or important their data and IT systems are to the business and to others, i.e. competitors, thieves, troublemakers, adversaries. The key is to start by connecting the dots between business goals and objectives, business processes that achieve the objectives, data and applications that automate the business processes, and infrastructure where the data is stored, processed, and transported. This helps create business context for cybersecurity risk management and how to balance this problem with all the other problems that are competing for attention by senior management today. There are 3 questions that business people need to ask to determine their risk level. What information assets do we have? What threats apply to these assets? And how vulnerable are we? Which is the inverse of how strong are our controls? There are many frameworks and standards that can be used to evaluate security posture and drive improvement. For small and medium businesses, I recommend using the CIS, Centre for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls. This is a priority list of 20 actionable controls with high payoff, aiming for a must-do first philosophy. The controls were derived from the most common attack patterns, and they serve as a good basis for immediate high-value action. The important thing is to do these basics well, not half-baked. Partial implementation is mostly a waste of time. Once this work is started and making progress, I also recommend that small and medium businesses consider joining the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange. It provides a Canadian view on cyber threats and exposures and actions to take. The key is to have a team that can review and act upon the intelligence provided from the CCTX. The second and probably most difficult area that needs work is the macro level of political and regulatory governance. We are seeing positive movement here, but it is slow and generally weak in enforcement. For example, on November the 17th, 2020, the Canadian House of Commons introduced the Digital Charter Implementation Act, DCIA, which includes the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, which is an update on PIPEDA. But in these rules, the Privacy Commissioner can only recommend fines. So there's a lack of teeth. The Canadian capital markets regulators could follow the more muscular SEC or US requirements for listed companies to improve their disclosure of cybersecurity oversight, risks, program management, and material incidents. The Canadian government, I think, should lean into the UN efforts to declare cyberspace a peaceful commons and create a binding treaty for international cyber norms. And finally, the Canadian government and business groups and businesses themselves should address the IT and information security product efficacy and performance issues. While there is a standard called the Common Criteria, or ISO 15408, for trusting security products, it is onerous and sometimes impractical. Nevertheless, why should we continue to accept basic security fails in system products, a la SolarWinds 123 as a password in the SolarWinds network monitoring product? Companies that make light bulbs have higher obligations. Would we today accept cars that systemically fail? The vendors need to be held accountable. Manufacturers of IT hardware and software, especially information security or cybersecurity technology, should be liable for negligent security failures that cause harm.
Excellent. You covered, I think, perfect.
That's
perfect.
fine. Okay, good.
So we've had 2-minute or 3-minute updates from all these guys. Do you want to update what you believe are the challenges on cybersecurity? Welcome, Dr. Mohamed El-Guindy. By the way, for
Thank
people
you.
who don't know him, he is a godfather in there. He works with EU and the United Nations training law enforcement, UK based. You look at his degree, you need a couple of days to go through. And he's directly in Prime Minister's office in Egypt. So a solid guy. I've known him for a very long time. So Dr. Mohamed
Thank you.
El-Guindy,
Thank you.
why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think are the challenges?
Okay, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and I'm very happy. It's my pleasure to be with all of you, my friends, Matthew, Chris, and you, of course, Bashir, and all the good sessions I've been watching all over the day. So thank you again. For the challenges, I really looking at from my point of view, especially in my region, especially in the Middle East. I think is the most severe problem, if I can say something like this, is the capacity of the human resources. So the problem is it's not easy to find the calibers in cybersecurity who understand what I can say is the interdisciplinary specialization, because cybersecurity. It's not one domain. So you have connecting everything now in the cyberspace, and everything is connected. People need to understand different methodologies and also need to understand how to manage the risk in different aspects and domains. And also it's not easy to connect all those dots with a guy, for example, who is thinking in a traditional way. So because also I'm teaching at the university, I see, people who are fresh joining the university. I cannot see that there is a lot of people who are thinking in this interdisciplinary world we are living in. So I think this is one of the most challenging things when it comes to cybersecurity in the 21st century. Is we need people who are capable of thinking as an interdisciplinary thinkers, not a traditional thinking way.
That's fantastic. Actually, I picked up 4 or 5 points. There's quite a lot of points here. People would have to listen to the video again, and we will make it available. But if you look at where we started with Sire, what he explained through the Rubik's Cube is this is a complex.
Yeah, I watched it many times, by the way. I watched it on YouTube also. Yeah,
it's very
thank
good.
you
It's a
for
two-way thing. You try to protect the center, and everything around you is changing all over the organization.
Yes.
So this business that we've got security under control, I don't know where it comes from, because we don't. And the only way to operate it is that we don't have it under control, so you remain sharp and stay on top. Otherwise, if you think you are on top, you're messed up, because really it's a moving target. It's a journey. It's a never-ending journey, right? Because you do one, they do 1.5. The second thing, what you talked about, I think Chris brought up, which is that the controls that you talked about are a big issue and how you manage them. Laws being weak, there's very little doubt about that. When you turn around and look at the corporate world taking data and storing it, I'm talking specifically about people like Facebooks and WhatsApp and who collect, but they're not the only one who collect the data. And what people don't understand, the product is not the product you're buying, the product is you. You are the product, because this is the only business in which the Facebook and the likes refer to you and me as the user, not the customer, right? This is the only industry where you are the user and not the customer. Then you look at one of the challenges that I learned umpteen years ago when I was handling this for Visa globally, is that when I put the standard, right, the PCI DSS, what was it supposed to? It was supposed to stop fraud and all that. But what was the challenge? Is the corporations made it cost of doing business. It's not. It is not a cost-cutting business. So when you start to combine all this thing, you realize that it's now you add to the skills that you just talked about, right? All of you have actually mentioned that. Then you got a bigger problem because we deal with it in silos. If you went for if you had a heart problem, unfortunately I did, what do? They do angiography, which is they inject this dye through your body to figure out exactly where it's getting stuck, right? Do we do that with cybersecurity or with data in the corporate world? No, we don't. You don't inject because we've got siloed and we've got different lines of business and they're all profit centers. So nobody knows what data you have got in the first place. To Chris's point, what are the assets, right? So how do you protect something if you don't know what you've got, right?
Well, I would just like to add something on these points that sort of ties them together. And to be honest, there are some people that do what we've spoken about, but they're top 1%, right? That's gonna be intelligence agencies. That's gonna be governments. That's gonna be, you know, mission critical organizations that do that. But it's very difficult. It's very costly. But to tie those points together that we just mentioned, exactly right. And for those that don't know, I have a penetration testing red team background, right? And so it's absolutely right. You have to know an array of technologies to find that way in. And what's really interesting about what we've spoken about is that for those that are old enough to remember the serial ports, you know, the old cables, you plug in the serial port and you set the baud rate and then you connect. And it's an old school way to connect to systems, right? But what was really interesting is, like, I would go into environments and they would have locked down their regular network, the Ethernet, the ports, all this stuff. But the serial ports, no, right? Because people just don't even understand that's the thing. It just looks like a funny connector on the back of a machine. And the same thing for JTAGs on hardware, right? You just don't know, which takes me to the second point about implementing the controls and understanding it. And something I've always said, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so if you've already started from a point, there's something called the Tempest attack, right? Where you can view computer screens through physical brick walls. And that's more science than hacking, but it is hacking, but it's really more science than computing. But my point here is that most people pretty much everyone doesn't know that these things are possible. So when you sit down in your risk assessment or you're assessing impact, how can you know what the biggest impact could be when you don't know what you don't know? And so the point there is that actually I sympathize with companies that do that because it's really difficult. But the flip side to that, I would say that you can't save money trying to not get the right people in, right? Because it's such a wide array of specialities, you need specialists, right? You need, you know, if you're reliant on NFC technologies, you want an NFC expert, right? And so on and so forth. And then, you know, secondly, be humble. Be willing to accept there are things you don't know and understand, because I can promise you there are, right? I mean, I every day I learn something new still. Is that wide? It's huge. So we have to work together and share that information and not let ego get in the way.
Absolutely. Chris, you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, thanks, Bashir. Hello, Sire and Mohamed again. You know, I've been alert to points that sort of maybe reinforce what we're talking about here. So just yesterday, a company called GoSecure posted a research article, and it just reinforces these basic things and the wishful thinking maybe, or perception versus reality. So here's three quick data points out of that report, which I just found great because they're so simple. The first one is they basically said that this reveals disconnects between important information and the security weaknesses or vulnerabilities. Password policies. 75% of organizations said that they have systems that enforce a mix of letters, numbers, and special characters. Yet 55% of pen tests, going back to Sire's point, found weak passwords were a vulnerability that was a root cause of a successful breach. And I've seen that in reality, where there are system rules with configuration parameters that says you can't have bad passwords, and then you find bad passwords because they somehow got in there somehow. And there's no enforcement on refreshing. Patch management. 90% of organizations believe that their patch management's important, but only 52% said it takes weeks or longer to apply important patches. Asset inventory, going back to the fundamental. 77% of organizations said they kept a complete inventory of their assets, yet GoSecure's penetration testers continue to leverage forgotten and unmaintained servers to enter a company's network. So as I've said to Bashir and Mohamed and Sire before, the inventory of your information, your assets, your systems, and your components is critical. If that is not very complete, then it's the stuff that's outside your peripheral vision that will always hurt you. And if you think about this, if you step back from a technology or a cybersecurity perspective, that's just a management issue. If you forget about or don't have your eye on some part of your organization, what happens? It doesn't get better. So there's a step back. And just responding to Mohamed's point, and going on the theme of this conference, back even in the morning with Peter and Bruce, it's all about collaboration, which, has connected Mohamed to this multidisciplinary point where you need to have a group of people with different skills and capabilities and even orientation and thinking to have a successful information security management system. And then that ties to the next sort of point in the morning and early afternoon, Bashir, about education. And there's education for people to not only learn the core basics, but learn about all these other, a little bit about the other multidisciplinary facets of information security so that they understand better. And there's education for users and consumers, and education for board members that I think is critical in order for consumers to ask companies questions about security. I believe firmly that until the buyers, the consumers, or in industry, the merchants, ask their suppliers of services and goods, do you have adequate security? And they don't indicate through their buying preference to go to a higher bar, then in truth, not much is going to happen. And so education is a long-term thing, but important. Doesn't mean that everyone needs to be experts like Sire and the details of how all this stuff works, or in cyber terrorism like Mohamed. But they need to be able to ask the questions and not blink when they get bullshit back.
That's actually very true. Mohamed, you want to add to the stuff that you kind of started? you want to add anything?
I think that also one of the issues related to when it comes to education is this is one of the most important things that I'm always thinking of, how to educate people in this ever-changing world of threats, because even the basic things we are not able to manage. So how about the things that are evolving every day? So even big companies, got hacked with a very simple hack. It's not, it's not very complicated. So most people understand, or think that, to be hacked, you should do something very, very, you have a big vulnerability to be hacked. It's not like this, because it's as simple as it can be hacked. Most companies are hackable because of the simple things, not the biggest things, because that's why most companies are investing in devices and security boxes and all those things, and even they don't pay attention to the simple things that they are putting inside their organizations. Even most people in the managerial level, for example, for people who I'm discussing here in the Middle East, that they see that cybersecurity is a technical issue. So we will send it to the IT guys. So this is the biggest problem, because securing a server or a network, it's different than making a cybersecurity policy or a cybersecurity governance or securing your business at all. This is different, because people understand that, yes, because this is a cyber and this is a network, and okay, throw it to the IT guys. This is not the solution. So that's why people didn't go much deeper in cybersecurity as a discipline, if we can say. It's a science. It's a science and an engineering. It's not just an IT field. It's not an IT field anymore.
I think you raise.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just on that point, you raise an interesting point there about it's not about vulnerabilities. And if I think back to all the testing I've done, I can probably count on 2 fingers, literally, where I've used what's known as the CVE, a publicly known vulnerability. But that doesn't mean I've done something even more amazing to the point. And actually, nearly every time, in fact, as I say, literally 2 times out of every time I've ever done it, you'll find what's called a configuration issue, right? Which, if you use a vulnerability scanner, it's not going to show anything. It's going to tell you you're secure. But what's interesting about managing systems is, again, that's really difficult. All it takes is an administrator there are these things known as flags, but for everyone watching, all you need to know is that it's like attaching a permission to something. And so an administrator can run a command and attach permissions or take away permissions for certain users. And it's literally a case of one mistake, or a really common mistake is using the asterisk, which is basically like what's known as a wild card, which applies the rules to everything in that space. And that's wonderful, because again, it's very difficult for even seasoned systems administrators to understand how that's affected, right? And so I would like to see education, but I think secure development and secure systems administration would be where I'd want to invest time, because I feel like, you get rid of a bunch of those things and you're not done, but it's a great point to start with. As I said, the fact that nearly every successful penetration, and we have 100% penetration rate, we've never not got in, right? But as I say, only 2 times we've ever used a public vulnerability. I don't even look at the vulnerabilities because they're often not important. A big enough organization, you don't need a vulnerability. And in fact, you don't want one, because there's security operations centers looking for that, and so you're going to get burnt, you're going to get found, you're going to get detected.
Sire, there have been a pretty bad hack in this city in the last 2.5 weeks, whatever. Very big organization. Nobody hears about it. They've been keeping quiet. They've been getting away, and they're not the only one. We see hacks all the time, and they're not getting reported. It's problem 1. Some of the things you said about education, here's the tools that Chris can tell you. We have talked about this before. That if you go into the corporate world, they've got plenty of tools. They don't even know how to use one properly, right?
Yeah.
Never mind about operating 2 properly. They don't know how to do 1 properly because they've got too many. And the way it operates in reality, and we're not here to attack anybody, just to identify the problem, right? Is that they don't buy the tool. The vendor tells them, if you buy this, your problem will be solved. If you buy that one, will solve everything. Rather than them identifying their own issues, right? So the problem is that, and you see that in the security world also, where the guy comes in because he's got a set idea about what the problem is. No, you don't know the problem. Unless you drill down what Chris talks about, you find out. Yeah, the part, can you imagine what all of you have identified is what? That the guys are coming through some of the simplest, fundamental, basic things, right? Not the big things, which tells you what? That they are missing out big time on what. So it's about the thinking, about the education, about understanding the critical thinking. If you go into the security world, you now have everybody wanting to go to security because they can make a lot of money. But do you understand? Have you taken time to understand? And what type of training are you getting? Am I selling piece of paper for certification? That's happening quite a lot too, right? So how are we helping this problem? And I think Chris is right. Actually, all of you have said that. So you get back to fundamentals and do it correctly, to which your point is if we were to develop a system in the first place securely, right? And you put the emphasis to actually educate these guys, think, by the way, build security in the first place, right? If they were doing that, you don't do it after the fact, because what has happened in order for convenience, supposed convenience, we have given up security and we've given up privacy, whether we realize that or not. We've done that, right? So that is it. Now, assume for a second that if you are hacked, let's go with this question. Assume for a second, not that are you going to get hacked, you are hacked. Now, how do you protect yourself? Chris, you want to go ahead?
The unfortunate answer is you've got a massive incident response bill on your hands now. If you do it properly.
Right. I'm not even talking about, you're correct. That's one of the, I'm talking about, assume that somebody who's going to break into your house, right? You can't stop him. The guy's in. Now, how do you minimize the damage is what I'm talking about. So what do you do as a security personnel, as an organization, that even if they got in, what they get is useless, right?
But I think the point that you're talking about there, let's take that as an example. There's still what I would say is impact, right? Which is where you always need to start. And in the case of your example, what are you worried about? Do you have some nice jewelry that you're worried about them stealing? Are you worried about your personal safety? And so depending on which one, you're going to have different solutions, right? A very simple solution for the jewelry, a little bit more complicated solution for your personal safety. And I think the same applies to business. One of the biggest mistakes I see is that companies say, we need to protect every digital asset, which actually is totally wrong. What you need to look at the business, because economically, the markets don't penalize companies for screwing up. If you actually look at some of these companies we're talking about, the share price dipped and then it actually took off better than it was, right? So there's no economic incentive in there. So what you need to say is, where's the business impact? And it's always different. If you're a food company, if someone can ruin your production process and spoil your food and give everyone food poisoning and loads of people get sick, that's the biggest business impact. Not having your web server hacked, not someone taking $10,000, someone poisoning all your customers. If you're Tesla, the worst thing someone could do is maliciously screw with the self-driving algorithm and start killing people. And if you're an e-commerce store, the worst thing that can happen is your payment gateway gets hacked and all your customers' credit cards are leaked. And so it's always different. And so the first place I think you need to start, and it's where I will start on both sides, blue and red team, is what's the biggest impact for this business, right? And impact is not necessarily one thing or another, right? So take the payment gateway company. If they have their corporate emails leaked, it's not going to be great for them, especially if the executives are saying stuff that's going to impact their reputation, but it's still nowhere near as big an impact as leaking your customers' credit card details, right? So I think you have to start at the point, business is all about continuing business, and making money. So, or whatever, or your purpose. So what would impact that thing? Look at Maersk, right? All their systems were nuked. They couldn't ship. Their logistics were screwed. That had the biggest impact.
Right.
Go ahead, Chris.
As you said, so understand the information assets and their value. And as I said in my little video, not only to yourself, but to others. Like that's part of the security agenda, which is not the internal control agenda. It's the security agenda that must recognize adversaries. But regardless, let's say it's not an adversary. Let's just say you have a big system crash. One of the things I've seen that differentiates how well people deal with this is, do they actually have playbooks to respond when an incident occurs, and have they actually practiced them? And look, my experience, as a consultant as well as an industry manager in these things, is the organizations that actually practice, develop these playbooks, practice and have drills, are incredibly better off than the ones that put one together, have one event, everyone congratulates themselves, and then it collects dust. When the event occurs is when the difference between those two organizations becomes horrifyingly clear. And this is where I think, Sire, you know, you point around the impact. A weak and messed up response that's not clear or is delayed because people don't know who to call and what to do is when things go worse very quickly. Like the Rubik's Cube just falls apart in front of you. It's not even a Rubik's Cube. The damage can be caused by the reaction or the lack of response or the poor response after an event. And then, you know, I was actually on a discussion last week about insurance. You know, yes, you can go to insurance, but unless you've actually gone through that insurance contract, either cyber and DE and OE insurance, you're going to find that probably most of what happened is excluded. So there's, again, a bunch of boring stuff like reading a telephone book level insurance contract and a few of them and figuring out, are you actually covered by things that could occur? Because this is where, again, you know, as you said, sorry, most organizations don't actually have a big impact, but the ones that have a big one are because they have fallen below the behavior of their peer litigants.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that do go down.
Yeah, I completely agree with both Chris and Sire. So I also agree that you know, that most of the companies are thinking like we need to protect everything. So it doesn't work like this, because you cannot protect everything. So you have to. So it's different, really. So you need to understand what is the most you know, important thing that affect you as a business, and then you have to go through the things that most affect you. And you know, it's not one solution fits all. So that's why you know, people who are buying more devices on procuring a lot of devices and tools, you know, don't succeed, because they understand it wrong. They understand that we need to get too much devices and too much tools in order to protect everything. So it doesn't work like this. So I completely agree that it's a business need. So it depends on the business and the impact on the business. I agree with you.
I agree. And just one point to add to this, which is interesting about these tools and solutions, is the actual reality, in my view, is that you can configure a Windows PC to be really secure. You can do it, right?
Yeah.
I've seen it done very well without any additional software. And in fact, there are times when introducing that additional software, you know, antivirus by its very nature operates in what I call God mode. It needs to see everything, to stop everything, and it needs to have all permissions to do these things. So in some ways, you can actually end up introducing something which is detrimental to your security, when ironically you didn't even need to spend the money. If you had actually had one of your engineers read the, you know, Windows manual or, you know, Windows internals and configured some stuff, there you go. Right, is possible, but that's not sexy. That doesn't make billions of dollars in cyber revenue. So
it doesn't show you dashboards with animated things and all those you know, shiny things.
No.
And part of this from a management perspective or a board perspective is sometimes the wrong question is asked. Right, how much are we spending on information security? Which, look, I'm an accountant by trade. It's not a bad crude rule of thumb or heuristic, but it is really only an input measure at best. And to use that as anything other than that is assuming that all the money got spent effectively and efficiently. And, you know, forget information security, but, you know, the world of IT that Bashir and you know, I and others have lived in for decades, you know, the road to hell is paved with IT projects. The Standish Group has said, yeah, a third of IT projects work out well, a third are wounded, i.e. they only achieve some part of their objectives, and a third are complete failures. Well, my bet is that on the if you took that review and put it across the information security or cybersecurity system projects and did a recalibration, you may find that it's even worse, because it's harder, it's less fun to do it right, and if you're going to implement an accounting system, right, your objective is to have materially correct information sufficient to make decisions, or as we've talked about in a regulatory, SEC or Canadian public company, materially accurate, not completely accurate, right? And the assumption in that environment is that we have a workforce that wants to do what they want to do. We need to have adequate controls to prevent and detect error. Maybe some fraud. That is the positive and rosy and sunny end of the dimension of what can go wrong. Security has to deal with, we may well have adversaries that are insiders that will try and subvert that project from its design to its operation. We certainly have people outside the organization that will try to do the same. And so that added burden comes into that domain of all information system security projects that are trying to achieve an objective. It's a harder world by definition.
So let me ask you, each of you guys, and it's a very good point you just made. Here's a question. I'm changing it slightly, but from the standpoint that there are always all sorts of priorities in companies that they need to deal with, fix, because of the security is now raised to the top, and we keep changing names around it and make it sexy and whatever, the tools and whatever. But here's my question, which is a little different. Would you agree or would you not agree that one of the failures in this is the fact that we do not use risk management in this thinking of the fact that, I mean, things can happen, but there's a possibility of a problem and there's a probability of a problem. And we don't look at that. And so, kind of Chris's point, we spend money and then we're trying to measure, which makes no sense. If we were to look at it and saying, okay, these are the potential things can go wrong, will go wrong, but we have done mitigating processes and controls in place. We need to worry about this because they can do the most damage. To use your word, the impact it can have. We're not doing that, obviously. Would you agree? Or what is your 2 cents on that?
Well, just to add something really quickly, the biggest mistakes I've seen in risk assessment meetings is the assumption that something is safe. Either that's a part of the network, like a VLAN, or it's a machine, or it's a VPN. The best piece of advice I ever got given, I unfortunately I can't tell you who it was from, but let's just say they've had a very fruitful career, securing some very interesting stuff. The best piece of advice I think they ever gave me was assume everything is hostile, right? So when you're doing a risk assessment, it's not, some people say, oh, Matt, doom and gloom, everything's, no, that's not my point. I'm not trying to sell you something, or I'm literally saying, when you do your risk assessment, never assume something's secure, because that assumption, you're already starting in a bad place, because you can't ever know that that is completely secure. It might have been backdoored by a nation state in transit, right? It might not even be a vulnerability. So you just don't know. Assume everything's hostile and go from there. That's my advice.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Mohamed, do you want to go next?
Yeah. I agree. And there is a case that I really was in discussion in something like this, a few days ago, that when I was discussing with some guys that you need to protect the system from the people who are working on the system. And they said, no, we trust those people. So that's okay, that's good. You know the people and they are your people and you trust the people. Okay, but I don't trust anything. So that's why I agree with the Sire that, even your people you don't need to trust, because, the breaches will not only, hit you from outside. So even there is a biggest internal threat inside your organization and don't pay attention to something like this.
Right.
That's why I agree that you need to treat everything as a hostile. Yes, I agree.
Right, because the question you have to ask yourself is, if someone paid my cleaner $10,000 cash to plug in a USB, would they do it? I would arguably pretty much every time, right? And
Exactly.
and for a big bank, that's peanut.
Chris, get your 2 cents in.
Yeah, my couple of points on this. Not only is there, I think, it's again a difficult domain of enterprise risk management. And in a lot of companies, enterprise risk management is not done well. It's really some poor person called the risk manager goes around to the executives with a list of risks and said, I think you should be worried about these. And they basically say, I don't understand or care, and go away. And so, you know, a good friend of mine who's Canadian that maybe, Bashir, you should actually get on a BizTech conference is Tim Leach. He has been a proponent for 20 years on objective-centric risk management. So, you know, what are my business objectives and what are the things that could go wrong that are relevant to that objective? That then creates a governance framework where the business decision makers are interested in risk management. And then within that, you can tie in the information and the technology and the security risks. The other thing that I've seen that makes a difference is, despite maybe the level of precision or mechanics of the risk management process, is the ability to summarize potential, you know, communicate the business impact, as I said, related to objectives or information assets of a certain initiative or an event or whatever, in terms of, you know, this is the information assets, this is how much it's worth to the business, this is the problem that's occurred or could occur, this is the controls we do or don't have, and here's the net risk. And putting that down on black and white in 2 or 3 pages, which is brutal, because usually we've got hundreds of pages of stuff to talk about, and you've got to now get this into like 600 words, and then get this in front of a C-suite person who owns that business domain. And what I found is, if you go through that effort, and believe me, I'm good at it, but it can take 2 days to write these memos, and you put it in front of these people, and they realize they can no longer say they didn't understand. And as soon as you get to that magic moment where they realize their name is on this memo saying, you were told, and you either agreed to do something there's 3 answers. One is, look, this is a really bad idea. And they can say, I'll go along with it. But now they know they actually have, their name is on this. Or it's not a bad idea. There's some pros and cons. It's a reasonable risk to take. Or there is nothing wrong. But that it goes back to Mohamed's point around multidiscipline capability in education. You may have some of the greatest technical people like Sire that have done compromise, and I'm not saying you couldn't, Sire, but yeah, have got all this technical detail about this system is easily hacked, and here's all the how it could occur. But until you can turn that into a paragraph that big for a C-suite person, you actually haven't done the risk management governance, right? And then here's my other sort of thing about people and insiders. Back when I started my information security audit and consulting career, I actually had hair. This is a long time ago, about when dirt was new. And I remember sitting at an Information Systems Security Association conference in St. Louis in the US. And I was sitting with a guy from MITRE and a guy from the FBI. And we were talking about the insider threat. And this is going back 25, 30 years. And there I was as a bit of a naive sort of audit type saying, you know, maybe there's 1 in 100 people could do something bad in an organization. And they said, you're new at this, aren't you? And the FBI guy said they'd done studies that said back then, so I get this is dated, but said back then, basically they figured out that 1 in 20 people have a problem. Money, booze, drugs, back then, sexuality, whatever it was, orientation, who knows, gambling, etc. And either they used that as a justification to do something wrong, or someone found out that they had the booze, drug, sexuality, whatever it was problem, and used that to lever them to do something wrong. And it's sort of like that classic thing saying, you know, if no one at your Christmas dinner, the extended family is crazy, then it's you, right? So you know, I've talked to organizations about the saying, look, if you've got 4,000 people in your organization, potentially you've got 200 bad actors. There could be more or less, but it's not zero. It's definitely not zero.
Yeah.
And then you say, so now, are you going to accept that risk, or are we going to do something about it?
That's a fantastic point you left. Now, since we've basically run out of time, how about we do the television thing here? Go around, give each person 30 seconds. Where would you prioritize? If you are doing it now, 30 seconds. Where would you so Matt?
Okay, I'll start. So I would say every single time I would answer the same thing: network security monitoring. There's a quote from the founder of ABB Robotics, which is, you can't manage what you can't measure, and you can't measure what you don't gather. And so if you literally think about it in a logical way, how can you defend things in a place that you're completely blind? You can't. It's impossible. So for me, number one will always be network security monitoring. Get some visibility, because if you've never done that, your dashboard will light up like a Christmas tree. I guarantee that.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Mohamed.
Because I'm a big fan of of educating people, so I will stress on the think differently, especially in this 21st century, because people are now looking at different solutions that are using artificial intelligence and cybersecurity and all those things. So I'm not against those tools, but I need to tell people that you need to think as a human in the first place, because I don't have a problem for machines to think, but I have biggest problems for people not to think. So I really need people to start thinking of the future that we are going.
Very good. Chris, you have the final word.
I'm going to sneak two things in. Going from Mohammed's point, think like an auditor, right? If your inventories aren't complete, they're not an inventory. And write like a journalist.
Very good. Yeah. No, it's very, very powerful what you just said. And people need to think and rehear that. I think it's been a very fascinating conversation. One thing I promised to do is to have a follow-up conversation in the fancy that with each of you again, to pick up on all the things you talked about here, because we're going to be recording this. And I have to agree completely with the skills are a problem, right? And skills, I don't mean they need more certification. It's the thinking has to change.
Thinking, yeah,
the
yes.
attitude and thinking has to change. The same old way is not working. People are working from home, and we never even talked about that dimension, which has added some other stuff into it. So there are many different facets, but what we've done today is part it. You guys were fantastic in identifying and putting the issues, and I promise you we'll follow up because we're recording this. So I want to thank each of you. I know for both of you it's very late in the night, for Sire and for Mohamed, because it's
it's 10:30 now, around 10:30 now.
10:30, 10:30 p.m. by the way, for those in Canada. It's only Chris and myself being in Ottawa and here, and with Sire also in Europe, in Sweden. So same time. So thank you very much. I really truly appreciate it. I'll be in touch. And by the way, thanks to you, I'm on 3 months, so we have protected conversation, which is fantastic. So Chris, thank you very much. I really truly appreciate it. I'll be in touch. Mohamed, same thing. I owe you a paper, right? Which was delayed because of this conference. So, and Sire, thank you very much.
No problem. We will have future issues, and we also invite Chris and Sire to write in the next publication of the Prime Minister publication.
I will
look forward to it. Thank you all.
Look forward to all the very best, guys. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay,